The most bullish billionaire in Bitcoin just unlocked a $4.2 trillion giant all into Bitcoin. And it's been a slow and gradual progression, but now this might have just accelerated the Bitcoin supply shock because one of the best jurisdictions in the world in order to obtain capital to buy Bitcoin has now just filed for a Bitcoin ETF, and we are going to see more and more companies out of Japan now start to get into Bitcoin. Now, if you're saying, okay, this is just an ETF filing, and why do you think that this is going to pile more companies into this Bitcoin Treasury company fiasco? Well, first, let's hear about what Michael Saylor always says and how he brings up Japan and Metaplanet seemingly in every opportunity he can. Now, let's listen into this clip from Bitcoin Prague.
When Metaplanet was a hotel, they might be able to buy $1 million of Bitcoin a year. But when Metaplanet started issuing equity, it's able to issue $1 billion of equity in a year. And so now they're buying not 1 million, but 1 billion a year. But the rate at which a company can issue equity or credit is exponential, but it's not like annual. You might be doubling every month.
So he's talking about how these companies can double every month. And even on his own earnings call, he brought up Japan and said, hey, quote, we need a monster Bitcoin treasury company in Japan. So bringing up Japan was no mistake. He brought it up because Metaplanet is in the best jurisdiction on the entire planet to execute on this strategy, and he knows it. Now, let's review a little bit about Japan. Obviously, I said they're a $4.2 trillion giant. They've got the fourth largest GDP of any single country. But why is it that, Michael Saylor keeps bringing all of this up? Well, there's been regulatory clarity in the Bitcoin space since 2017. This was one of the first major countries in order to recognize Bitcoin. And there's been good financial services agency oversight. So there's been great framework on their exchanges and custodians here lately. Now, why does this regulatory clarity matter? Well, okay, you could say MSTR, all of these big dogs, they didn't care about regulatory clarity. They just got started. Well, look at the facts here. Donald Trump and his, cabinet have been in office for less than a year. And MSTR started this strategy almost 5 years ago. Within this less than year period, they've accumulated 60% of their entire holdings. So this regulatory clarity is allowing for strategy to now unlock more capital markets. Now, let's keep diving into why Japan is such a good market for something like this. Well, it has one of the largest and most liquid capital markets globally, top 3 in stock market size. We already showed you it's the 4th largest GDP of any single country in the world. And then it has a strong presence of institutional investors, pension funds, banks, insurers, and creates a strong, stable financial ecosystem. Also, access to cheap capital with ultra low interest rates makes Japan's ideal for debt finance treasury companies. So what do we start to see here, right? We start to see the Metaplanets of the world. Dylan LeClaire's coming out and saying, hey, you know what? We're doing the preferred perpetual stock, the Class A and the Class B, similar to what we already saw with MSTR. And through all of this, right, we started to see the giant of MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor recognize Metaplanet. And in fact, he even came out and said at one point in time that Japan could be the only country that could pass him because of just their access to debt and their capital markets. So all of these things just are adding up to show that, hey, you know what? Even though the United States is the alpha dog, the big dog in the house, and Michael Saylor's got nearly a 550,000 Bitcoin head start on the next closest guy, well, these capital markets just allow for a lot of buying and a lot of an accumulation. So we already see that out of Dylan LeClaire, who is essentially just copying the playbook, which Saylor has come out and said, hey, copy our playbook. This is the way to go. Now, continuing along there, the weakened yen drives alternative store of value interest, which is something that we saw previously, right? The Japanese bond market is one that nobody wants to invest in because they have negative rates, right? Everybody has been looking for some sort of alternative to the bond market in Japan. And it's something where, hey, you know what? We're offering these bonds or perpetual stock offerings or something similar to what MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy B, is doing as a meta planet. Well, you just unlocked billions and potentially, multiple tens of billions, hundreds of billions, maybe even close to trillions of dollars worth of assets now looking for an alternative. And on top of it all, Japan is a very, let's call it, crypto ready population, or at least according to ChatGPT, what they're saying here. But it has the highest rate of digital infrastructure adoption and early exposure to Bitcoin. But Mt. Gox was based in Japan. Look, I know what happened in Mt. Gox, but obviously there's been a growing institutional appetite. It's been a global hub for strategic partnerships. So the market size, the conditions, all of these things are adding up for MetaPlanet to continue on its path. And it's been called the MicroStrategy of Japan, just buying Bitcoin and more Bitcoin. And its stock predictably pumped. And this was back in June 2000 or June 11 of last year. So these things are continuing to pump along. And the now ETF offering, you might say, how are these two things really, correlated? Well, you could look at the differences and you can look at BlackRock and you could look at all of these things. But I mean, if you look at just strictly from an ETF history, well, BlackRock's iBet ETF had the most successful launch of any Bitcoin or of any ETF that for that matter in history, right? So fastest to get to 10 billion assets under management in just 7 weeks. It reached 40 billion in 211 days. It hit another, all of these different landmarks it hit faster than any other ETF in history, showing the growing institutional demand for people on the United States that were essentially just sitting on the sidelines for all of this, right? So as these companies and these corporations were just sitting on the sidelines waiting for all of this, it seems like more and more of these corporations and people are looking for some sort of access to Bitcoin. Now, once you get these ETFs in line, well, that just legitimizes all of this, right? And it increases the speed of adoption because all of these people now have more and more access to these capital markets. Now, MSTR stock rises. Saylor will always double down on the approach, and that continues to happen, right? As they continue to go along. But these bullish messages that Saylor keeps putting it through and encouraging all of his constituents, including what we see from MetaPlanet, well, it just leads for more and more bullish news to come out for these Bitcoin treasury companies. We're going to get into all of the bullish news continuing there, but let's take a peek in on these Bitcoin treasury companies, as now we have 163 publicly traded companies now owning Bitcoin. And there's 8 public companies and 1 ETF in Japan, making it the 5th largest out of any country in the world to have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, behind China, UK, which has seemingly sold off all of their seized Bitcoin holdings, Canada, which has been very apprehensive to Bitcoin, and then, of course, the big dog in the house, United States. So if this is the case, and we're seeing, Japan start to inch its way into more and more Bitcoin holdings, well, what did that make for now something to behold here? Wouldn't we see the potential of MSTR and some of these other big giants start to come along? Well, that's where I think is all happening here, as we're seeing Michael Saylor's influence now span borders and span more and more borders as he's coming along. And it seems like every single place he goes, he went to Brazil. They were considering a Bitcoin strategic reserve. He talks about Japan in his own shareholders meeting for strategy. I mean, how is that not enough validation for an investor in the Japanese market? So these things are going to continue to keep adding up, and his influence is going to see bounds. And he's seeing all of these markets that allow you to access cheap capital, cheap debt to obtain more and more and more Bitcoin. And Japan is at the top of this list. I mean, all of these people, right? I mean, even the Twitter guys coming at him, Michael Sullivan here is even saying bringing up Japan was no mistake. He understands that this is, the biggest there. And, we see Metaplanet buying 463 Bitcoin, adding its total holdings to 17,000. Look, and I'm not saying that Metaplanet all of a sudden is going to leap and bound past all of these guys, but they were a dying hotel business, and now they are the 7th largest holder of Bitcoin, just behind Trump Media at number 6. But they've passed all of these big, giant United States companies, all because they are continuing to double and triple down. And these guys are not going to slow down, right? I mean, they've got Dylan LeClaire at the helm, and, their stock continues to pump. And so they'll keep going through and implementing this MSTR flywheel and implementing more and more debt-based strategies. And for those of you guys who haven't seen it yet, I love to point out this MSTR reflexive flywheel here, where we see they're issuing more debt to buy more Bitcoin. Bitcoin increases, their market cap increases. Thus, the market cap and the weight in indices will increase. Look, I'm not 100% clear on all of the different indices that we've got on all of the Japanese markets. But the long story short here is that, we're seeing basically this flywheel be implemented in different jurisdictions around the globe. And that's going to continue to happen, right? I mean, more and more debt's going to be issued to buy up more and more Bitcoin. And these guys aren't selling. I mean, if you go down here, outside of, maybe Tesla, and you've got some of these other guys, like they just continue to keep stacking. I mean, could zoom in a little bit on this chart, but they're all just up and to the right. Granted, some of these Bitcoin miners, they need to sell, and some of these other things. So, I'm not necessarily looking at these Bitcoin mining companies as a good example, but these Bitcoin treasury companies that we see, those are the guys that we need to keep a close eye on, because they ain't selling, and neither should you guys be selling. I mean, we've got Bitcoin floating around at this point, and we'll get into more of what else bullish action is going on here, not just out of Japan, but deeper on. We've got Bitcoin floating around 115,000, and we see all of these bullish signals now happening around the world. And I asked myself, why are you guys selling Bitcoin when we have products like Salt Lending, when you could borrow against your Bitcoin at this point? If you go to saltlending.com/green candle, you can never need to sell your Bitcoin. They've got, non-liquidation shield here in Salt Shield, where they've got some different places that you can go to. They've got rates starting as low as 8.95%. And for Green Candle listeners, all you guys coming here in the chat, I see a lot of familiar faces here. They will give you guys a deal if you go to saltlending.com/green candle. And then, you can get up to 70% duration. All get cash really quick. They have zero rehypothecation. It started in 2016, and this no liquidation solution will give you assurance that you don't have to stress about losing your Bitcoin. And get your Lightning wallets ready, folks, because I'm going to be giving you guys some free Bitcoin courtesy of my friends over at the Bitcoin Well. So you could put this all in one wallet. Then you could go to Salt Lending, and you won't even need to sell these sats in order to do that. But if you sign up today, you will go at bitcoinwell.com/green candle. You'll get 500 wishing well points. Then you buy Bitcoin, you get 500 more. Then you get a chance to win 1 million sats. All you got to do is do that, or you could just hit that subscribe button with the bell notifications and come to the Green Candle live streams, because boom, I am giving you guys free sats every time 443 sats straight to your dome piece. And if you missed it, if somebody else scooped these stats before you, make sure you go to bitcoinwell.com, sign up here. You'll get 500 points. And if you go down and you want to make a big smash buy, go to the Bitcoin Well Infinite, just scroll on down. And you better hurry, because Metaplanet and all of these other guys, they're scooping up Bitcoin at an all-time rate. BTC Moon guys asking, did the UK ever sell? No, they have not confirmed sold just yet, but they are looking into it, right? Which I think is just enough for me to say that they're going to do it, especially as hostile as we've seen the UK government be towards Bitcoin. What is going on? We've got Shane Bing Bong. Glad you can make it here. Let's break through, baby. Let's break through that. We've got some great guys in the chat. So, yes, Salt is very great. So I think you guys need to go check those guys out. And I'm giving you guys a great rate here with the green candle discount and all of that. But Japan, their financial sector, it's a really interesting story here, right? Because of how connected they are to the United States. Obviously, we saw what happened back in August of last year. For those of you who don't remember, it was the Japanese carry trade, right? I had Jack Mahlers on the podcast around that time as well, where Japan raised interest rates by 25 basis points. Sounds like a little amount, but there was essentially this arbitrage going on where you would trade into the Japanese yen, you'd get a little bit more out, then you'd trade back into the dollar or whatever currency you'd like, and you would get more purchasing power just by simply doing this trade, this swap, this arbitrage. Well, once Japan increased that, you saw everything start to crumble. We saw more volatility in the market than we saw in 2008 and 2020. Those were the only two times in my lifetime that we saw that much volatility in the market. All Japan had to do was raise by 25 basis points. And they are one of the largest holders of U.S. equities and bonds, U.S. bonds and treasuries. And we saw them start to sell off for the first time last year. So this intertwining with the U.S. financial markets is very interesting and should be, kind of kept in a close eye with all of what we are seeing here, because Japan and the U.S. are always going to be very close-knit, but their financial sector faces the biggest shakeup, like it says, in decades, where thanks to an end to zero interest rates and an imminent wave of inheritances, about half of Japan's wealth is kept in cash or current accounts because for years, savings have made no money. That is changing as interest rates are forcing banks to compete with different offers. Now, this is what Michael Saylor has seen, right? Half of Japan's wealth is kept in cash or current accounts. And he details all of, if I have a low risk, but I could give you 8-9% bond dividend from all of this, right? Why wouldn't you have that incentive to now put your savings in there, right? Why wouldn't you? You see, you get the Bitcoin upside, you don't get as much downside risk. Well, if Metaplanet can do that, it seems like investors in Japan who have literally 50% of all of their wealth in savings, it seems like it would be a no-brainer. So 50% of their wealth can now be transferred to something like a Metaplanet. Do you guys see where I'm going with this and see how bullish that this could be here? And at the end of the day, Michael Saylor has realized all of this. He's realized that, hey, you know what? The Japanese market is the only one that could potentially compete with what I've got going on here. So it's very interesting when we start to see, this unfold, so to speak, where we start to see the Japanese market look ripe for all of this. And now we're starting to see, the ETF of BlackRock obviously had such a massive shooting success. It only leads me to believe that the Japanese launch is going to be very similar. Maybe not quite as bullish as the BlackRock ETF. Of course, BlackRock is the largest asset holder on the planet, right? So we aren't going to see, hey, you know what, BlackRock rival this ETF, the Japanese SBI Holdings Bitcoin ETF. We're not going to see that rival by any means the Bitcoin or the BlackRock ETF. We're not going to see, the top 1% of ETF with 40 billion, under assets under management as quickly as we saw with other things. But, we're not going to see the Japanese Bitcoin ETF break all these records. But the reality of this is as we're going to start to see this effect continue to roll on. This is something that's going to be very positive here going forward. It's going to unlock a new type of investor towards Bitcoin, right? And unlocking this new type of investor towards Bitcoin, well, you're seeing all these headlines I'm putting on this, this right here, right? Where we're seeing, hey, at BlackRock breaking literally every single record underneath the sun for all of this. It's not out of the question or the worlds of possibilities for, the Japanese Bitcoin ETF to do the same for the Japanese markets. And on top of it, now seeing that access, right? Seeing the wave of institutional adoption. Of course, Strategy was the first one, the pioneer to do it all. But the BlackRock ETF coming in and really just pushing and throwing its weight around, to be quite frank, with all of this, has now unlocked more capital towards Bitcoin than anything in the world. And of course, it started with MicroStrategy. Of course, this starts with Japan and Metaplanet in Japan. But these ETFs now add another layer of validity towards Bitcoin in these different markets. And that's where we're going to start to see more and more capital start to get dumped in. So I think this is just a start here. BTC Moon Guy, I appreciate it. For those of you who don't know, I was on Robert Breedlove's podcast. I encourage you guys all to go check that out here after this. Yeah, I think that this is going to continue to keep on. And TF is saying, I wonder how Metaplanet loses its stock value when Japan's lowers the BTC tax rate from 55% to a lower number to 20%, let's say. Yeah, I mean, I truly believe that this is going to continue to rise up. And if you truly believe in Bitcoin, why are you not buying MSTR instead of leverage BTC to buy more BTC in the future? That's the question. Made me consider not stacking anymore. Hey, man, I think, do Bitcoin in cold storage is the way to go. I think that's what you guys should be always looking at, is Bitcoin in cold storage. And I encourage you guys to do that first and foremost. Find yourself a hardware wallet. Any one of them works. I mean, I've got a Treasure. Maybe I'll have a promo code here for you guys here in a second. But we've got a Treasure, all of these different ones. I've got some of these other, Ledgers, another one. What have we had? We've had some of these other great ones on there. But I think at the end of the day, holding Bitcoin in cold storage is the true superpower. And I think if you guys aren't holding Bitcoin in cold storage, you're really going against a lot of, Bitcoin's true core values. So I encourage you guys to go to cryptosteel.com. This is the easiest way to store your seed phrase, right? I've got one right here. It's literally, the case right here. You could screw it in. You could put a tamper seal on it. You could hold your seed phrase all in this. You use promo code Green Candle, you get 25% off. And it's not even breaking your bank. They've got all of these different things. It's modular. So you can hold all your kinds of passwords in there. Uppercase, lowercase, everything. And you don't need a hammer or anything. So there's really no excuse to say, hey, you know what? I want to do this. I want to do that. You guys, you could do this so easily and so quickly by just going to cryptosteel.com and using promo code Green Candle. You could do this for under $30 to store your generational wealth. And this case right here, I know it doesn't look like much, but it's held up to 1 ton. 1 ton of force. So that thing isn't going anywhere unless you got one of Luke Mikich's girlfriends sitting on it. I mean, hey, you guys didn't hear that from me, but the dude likes a little cushion for the pushing. Just make sure you comment that next time you're in his chat room. But anyway, regardless, what we are seeing you got to watch out for these Bitcoin treasury companies, right? Because Metaplanet, these Japanese markets, we got Anap Holdings starting to come in. We've got some of these other Japanese companies, Konavo Inc. We got all these new Japanese companies start to pop up, right? I think that these things are going to accelerate. I don't know about all this. I don't encourage you guys to borrow against your Bitcoin to buy MSTR. I don't. That's not financial advice. But if you guys were going to borrow against your Bitcoin, hey, man, I'm trying to help you guys out with Salt Lending. Those guys are great partners. Smash Toshi Nakamoto. I don't think you can tokenize a kidney yet. Hopefully we never get to that point. And you'll still have a leverage BTC narrative for Metaplanet. I think every single one of these guys, every single one of, these Bitcoin treasury companies, you'll have the leveraged narrative about it. I think it's just a matter of time. And, is it a huge negative to have that narrative? I'm not quite sure. But I do think it is encouraging that we are seeing more of these companies come online. And the Japanese market is ripe for the taking. So make sure you guys are smoking that like Cheech and Chong and hitting that subscribe button. Thank you to the nearly 200 of you guys clocking in. Go check out my appearance on Robert Breedlove's podcast, and I'll catch you guys all on the next one.